So sticking with this kind of Nicaragua vein, though, you've done a lot of good work, presenting new music there, and you were co-founder and artistic director of Nicaragua's first new music ensemble. So, what was the experience of forming this like, and how was the group and the music that you programmed? How's that received by audiences there?
That was an incredibly fun project. Just to give a little context, that was right after actually, it was when I was finishing my dissertation. My wife and I moved to Nicaragua, and so I finished writing my dissertation. At that point, she got into a master's program down there, and we realized, oh, we're going to stay here a couple of years. And I decided I really want to get involved much deeper into the classical music and contemporary music community. And so I applied for a U.S. Fulbright scholarship and got one, which was a kind of a strange situation because I'm Nicaraguan and everyone there knows me as Nicaraguan, but I was working as an American working in
Yeah,
Nicaragua.
yeah,
And I think some people in the embassy were a little annoyed because, they pretty much saw me as Nicaraguan as well. Again, it's just a bicultural situation that I'm always juggling. But in any case, that Fulbright gave me the funding and the ability and the means to work with local conservatory down there, associated with the Polytechnic University. And so I started to write some pieces for the orchestra. I give classes, do some things, and there were a couple faculty members there that we just hit it off. We really loved working together. This violinist from Cuba, Gabriel Hernandez. There was this other violinist. He didn't work at the conservatory, but he was always kicking around playing in a lot of like rock bands and stuff. This guy, Osman Delgado, a violist, Julio Medina, and then the cellist, also from Cuba, Gabriela Barroso. So there were three Gabriels, two Gabriels and a Gabriela in this in this little group, and they formed a string quartet. And so I started to write this sort of long multi-movement string quartet for them. But at the same time, I was hanging out with a bunch of other musicians, and I really hit it off with this guy Guillermo Norori, who's he's like formally trained. He studied at the Royal Academy of Music in London, and he's Mexican and Nicaraguan. And he started this really amazing group down there called Momotombo, which was nominated. I think he was nominated for Latin Grammy a couple years ago. So he's really active, like in the pop music scene. But he wanted to start writing some chamber music, and so I told him, why don't we join forces? We can start like helping each other out, working together with this group. He recruited a bunch of other collaborators, like some visual artists, people that do like intermedia and multimedia work, graphic designers. He eventually recruited a bunch of other performers, and we started this project called Proyecto Eco, which was both an ensemble but also like a presenting organization. And so we presented concerts with conservatory orchestra, for example. We presented concerts like at bars with a string quartet, sometimes a quintet with an added bass. We presented at like various cultural centers, like in the country, and it was mostly pieces that he wrote and that I wrote. And then occasionally we would invite this flutist who graduated from Berkeley with two E's, the one in Boston, Juan Rosales, who's also a good composer, and he wrote a piece for the orchestra. And so slowly we were kind of creating this really interesting, essentially like collective that was just exclusively focused on contemporary music, mostly by those three composers, and then occasionally a few other pieces by other Latin American composers. And I was like really amazed at how well received the music was, the concerts were. It was absolutely incredible. Like everywhere, we'd be at a bar playing, and obviously you'd have to amplify the quartet, but people would actually like stop talking and drinking and hang out and sit back and listen for kind of extended periods of time, and then talk to us and ask questions. And they were super into the sort of modernness of it.
Mm.
And then at larger, more formal venues, people were very, very open and amenable to what we were doing. Some of the tunes were a little more traditional. Some that I wrote in particular were like hyper experimental, to the point that I think most audiences, in the US would probably be uncomfortable listening to them. But I think maybe because there were not a lot of expectations about what a classical, in quotes, what a classical concert should be, the audiences there seem to be just much more open to whatever happens. I think in total we probably had maybe like 3,000 audience members, like at the various different concerts that we put on. As a little spin-off from that project, my wife and I started this live music concert series in our home in Granada, Nicaragua, which is this really old, beautiful colonial town. And we called this series Palenque Vivo because we lived on Palenque Street. So it's just Palenque like live. And we would put on essentially two of the same concert. One where we invited the wealthy Nicaraguans who would very generously pay a lot for a ticket and for some drinks and some food. And then we would have an open concert, just open to the public, funded by the other concert, the first concert that we put on. And then people would just come and go and they would listen and just enjoy the music. And I felt like at the time that both of these projects, Proyecto Eco and Palenque Vivo, were just getting started. They were just flourishing. And then at that point, my wife and I decided, it was probably time we left Nicaragua. I was starting to apply to academic jobs more seriously. And then immediately after that, there was just a horrible political crisis in Nicaragua, and the whole country shut down. And unfortunately, everything with both of these projects and a lot of these performers has just been kind of on hold for a little while. But it was overall just like an amazing experience. I also had to learn, kind of like you mentioned, I'm not a conductor, but I had to learn to conduct
Yeah.
sort of by force. I presented my crazy prickly piece to the conductor of the orchestra down there, and he's like, "Oh yeah, great, you conduct it." He didn't want you don't want to learn how to do all that
Yeah.
nonsense. So it was also just a good technical experience for me.
Yeah. I find when you're like building those things from the ground up, you're always kind of forced into doing stuff you don't know what you're actually doing. And it's a good learning experience, you know. It's like, because I learned how to I didn't I didn't learn how to conduct with your piece specifically, but that was one of the only handful of times I've publicly conducted. And it was great. It was a
It's
good learning experience.
it's a really good learning experience, and it colors how you compose. If you know more or
Exactly.
less how to put the piece together, you can make more strategic decisions on the compositional side of things. One thing that was really interesting, I think, with these projects in Nicaragua was that because I was collaborating like with Guillermo Norori, and he's much more in the realm of like pop music or rock, or I don't know really what to call it. He has a lot of experience putting on like huge shows, kind of festival like shows in giant stages at the beaches, and drawing thousands of audiences. So he had a lot of connections with local businesses and breweries and cultural centers and everything. And watching him do his work and finding funding for a lot of these concerts, and just sort of selling this idea of contemporary music for orchestra. And then we would be talking to like a marketing person at the beer company, and they'd be like, "Why does anyone care about contemporary music for orchestra?" And then this guy Norodi was just super charming, and he would just like, you know, just pitch this incredible, beautiful, like utopian view of blending of the past, the traditions with what's coming in the future, and technology with contemporary techniques. And it's great for the musicians, and it's great for the audiences. And he would, the way that he kind of spun this beautiful story about the value of this kind of art was exceptional. And that was, to me, probably one of the best learning experiences for that kind of entrepreneurial approach of putting on your own shows and organizing things from the ground up.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Micromaker by Loose Leaf Transmissions. We hope you enjoyed this brief glimpse into the inner workings of the creative life. If this resonated with you, be sure to check out the full conversation on Music Maker with Tyler Klein, a podcast exploring craft and process, philosophy and inspiration, and the honest, often messy parts of being an artist, creative uncertainty, purpose and identity, and resilience. You can find Music Maker wherever you get your podcasts or by visiting musicmakerpodcast.com.